Thanks for joining us on 90s Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. On October the 21st, a federal appeals court issued a ruling that temporarily blocked President Joe Biden's plan to cancel billions of dollars in federal student loans. This is because the court is considering a motion from 6 Republican-led states to block the program. The Biden administration was ordered not to act on the program while the appeal is considered. It is unclear what that decision means for the 22 million borrowers who already applied for the relief, but for now, the administration is encouraging people to keep applying. 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor joined us last week to discuss what he thinks will be coming next and what those who have already applied should expect.
So, Whitney, could you start by giving us an idea about the background to this pause? On what grounds? I mentioned that this is coming as a result, I believe, of executive overreach. Could you expand upon that a little bit, please?
Sure, that's exactly right. So after the Biden executive order essentially discharging this federal debt, a number of lawsuits came about. There was even one from somebody who was going to receive the debt relief, but they were facing state taxes for that. And so they actually sued saying, hey, I don't want to be part of it. So there were a number of different lawsuits, but the one specifically we're talking about was a group of Republican attorney generals, I think about 6 states, challenged it. And a lower court judge, a district court judge in St. Louis said, while I think there's something there, you lack standing. So every lawsuit, the plaintiffs have to have standing, meaning they suffered some harm that the court can remedy in some way. And here the court said, no, you essentially don't have standing because you haven't suffered any injury by this executive order. And so those Republican attorney generals, they filed the appeal, and the 8th Circuit Court of Appeal just got the appeal. And what they did was they stayed everything. So they said, for now, you can't enforce the debt relief until we look further at the appeal. So it's essentially a temporary win for the Republican attorneys general.
And is that standard practice? So you mentioned that there's been a stay put in. So in a case like this one where there's some question about it, is it the default mechanism that from a judge in this case that there will be a pause put in place? Is that how it typically works?
That's a great question. And yes and no. So when an appeal is filed, there's so many different ways it can go. But essentially, whatever the lower court judge says is essentially stayed. It's stopped while the appeal is pending. And so a lot of times, like, let's say, a plaintiff sues IBM, a major corporation, and wins $1 million. And IBM appeals it. Well, they won't be able to collect on that million while the appeal is pending. But in that case, IBM would have to post a bond so that in the event when all the appeal was done, if that plaintiff still won, the money would still be there. So it works that way. A lot of times while an appeal is pending, everything will be stayed, stop the status quo. That's actually what the court is going to be looking at, though. Right now, it has stopped the enforcement of the debt relief. But I think by next week, it will probably issue an order saying what the status quo is. In other words, while the appeal is going, people can keep applying and the program can go forward, or while the appeal is pending, the program can't go forward. They'll probably make that decision next week.
By the way, for reference, for those of you who might be watching a little later, we're recording this on Thursday, October the 27th. Whitney, I kind of recall that you predicted this back over the summer when this first came out, this executive order on student debt relief first came out. You predicted that there would be some sort of legal action. Is this roughly the kind of legal action that you expected that would take place?
This is exactly what I expected, because essentially the Biden administration, the argument was this wasn't an act of Congress. This was an executive order, and the Republicans said he's overstepped his bounds, that the Biden administration didn't have the authority. Now, the Biden administration has issued a number of memos stating why it believes that it legally has the right. And essentially, it boils down to the fact that they had the power to cancel the student loans because of the national emergency declaration from COVID-19. And so The administration's been hammering that the education department has the authority to cancel large amounts of debt to help borrowers respond to the effects of the pandemic. And so, this appeal, I totally expected. I predict, since the issue is really about standing, who has been damaged? Can they find a plaintiff that's actually been damaged by this order? And I don't think they're going to be able to. So while this is a win for the plaintiffs and it stopped it temporarily, stopped the Biden's debt relief, I think ultimately those plaintiffs will lose the appeal and the program will be able to go forward.
Kind of interesting to me is that the administration is still encouraging people to apply for the student debt relief, despite the fact that it's stayed. Can can people still apply for that, and how does that work if there's technically a
Right.
stay on it?
It's a great question. And the administration is actually encouraging everybody to continue to apply. And I think it's open through December 31st. I think this is more of a political argument because now I think there's already almost 22 million applicants at this point. So by December 31st, that number will probably be larger. And I suspect the Biden administration might try and make the argument that, look, so many more people are relying on this promise. Now, court, for you to take this away is causing even further damage. So that could be a tactical reason to say why you can continue to apply while it's on stay. Mm-hmm.
And one other thing I can't help but think about here as well. You mentioned there is a political angle here, no doubt about it. And this was filed by 6 Republican attorneys general across the
Mm-hmm.
country. I can't help but think about the fact that this state was put in a mere 2-3 weeks before the midterm elections as well.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's the question: will we have further rulings? In other words, will the judge say, "Well, the status quo is that the program's going forward," and the appellant, the states, the Republican states, then we'll just have to wait out the appeal, which could take, they may try and fast track this, but an appeal could take, up to a year. I don't know how long this one will take.
I guess one main question that comes to mind is that for those 22 million people and the inevitable millions more that will apply for this, how concerned should those people who stand to benefit from this be?
Well, that's the thing. I would not go and make an expensive purchase or rely on it getting discharged. I mean, the White
Mm,
House is beating on the table and is stating quite confidently that they believe they'll prevail. I do as well as a legal analyst, but of course, you never know what a court may do, what a judge may do. And so, yeah, it makes sense for people to be as conservative as possible until they know that it is going to go forward. And I will tell you though that this is one important case, but there were, even last week there were 3 or 4 other cases that just like this that were dismissed for almost all of them based on standing. In
mm.
fact, there was one that was dismissed that they sought a writ in front of the Supreme Court, and Amy Coney Barrett was actually the one that rejected that and didn't accept the appeal. So there's been a lot of other victories for the Biden administration, if you will, but this is the one that's important because of this temporary stay.
So I guess don't plan on the money necessarily being returned, but you did say that you expect the final outcome to uphold the student loan debt relief. Could you walk us through why you think that?
Yes. Well, I think one of the issues, honestly, is, and some people would argue this is a technicality, is standing. I don't think they're going to be able to find a plaintiff that actually can say, I am being harmed by this program, right? It
Mm,
would all be speculative. This is why a lot of times you'll see lawsuits where people go forward as a taxpayer and say, hey, as a taxpayer, this is going to, and they get dismissed on standing because that's too remote of a damage, if you will. So I think that's probably, the standing is going to be the biggest issue for the plaintiffs. And all of our lawsuits involve procedural due process, which is the process it goes through, and then substantive due process, which is the law itself. So here we're talking about a procedural issue, standing.
And I guess with that in mind, any final thoughts to add on this topic?
No, it's obviously a political, as everything, it's become highly partisan. It does raise interesting legal issues because it really does. It is really about the power and the checks and balances. Because the argument is, and this is why executive orders come under criticism often, because it's just this unilateral action by the president, and there's no real check and balance. So this is a constant, this is going to be an issue right now with the congressional committee who's issued a subpoena to President Trump. Now he's some people would argue he's a citizen, he's a former president, but the issue there, some people would argue that, well, if a president has to be subjected to a subpoena from Congress, well, then he's subjecting himself to the authority of Congress. He's not equal then. And so there's going to be, this is, as we flush out our democracy and we, play out these issues, it's really an issue of checks and balances and what branch has power. So we're seeing this in a lot of different ways. This is just another example of what the scope of the president's power.
Well, interesting topic and interesting questions that this inevitably raises. But Whitney, thanks so much for lending us a few minutes of your time and your expertise to kind of shine light on some of those issues surrounding the student loan relief specifically, and again, some of those wider questions that could come out of it. So thanks so much for your time here today, Whitney.
For sure. And I'll be back when there's more more appeals and more decisions, probably from the Supreme Court at some point.
Sounds inevitable. So we'll see you again here soon. Thanks, Whitney.